The EU can claim its fair share of successes, not the least of which is the peace it has brought. But there are some major challenges ahead. One of the biggest has to do with the way the EU is governed. Europe claims to be one of the great champions of liberal democracy, but just how representative is the EU itself? There are three major bodies at the top of the EU structure: the European Parliament, the European Council and the European Commission. But only the Parliament is directly elected by the people. Every 5 years Europeans go to the polls to elect their representatives. Well, that's the theory anyway. In reality, it seems most Europeans are not sufficiently engaged in the great European experiment to actually be bothered casting a vote. Perhaps that's because of a common perception, right or wrong, that EU bureaucrats are accountable to nobody but themselves, that they're good at meddling in other people's affairs while bungling their own. To be fair, the structure of the EU is still evolving, but over the next few decades Europe will have to decide whether it moves closer to becoming a superstate, a kind of United States of Europe, or whether it remains a confederacy of true nation states. And it will have to engage the voter at every stage in that process. One of the big challenges ahead is what I call administration without asphyxiation. As an Australian who's lived and worked across Europe for a number of years now, I've come to appreciate some of the social democratic systems that help the disadvantaged. But sadly, some of those same systems seem to disadvantage those who want to help themselves, by starting new businesses, for example. I mean, what's the point of the EU throwing money at entrepreneurs with one hand, while with the other strangling their creativity through endless regulations and taxes? Pioneers need space. If Europe's going to compete, it will have to provide it. One of the big challenges facing Europe is cultural. How do we allow space for subcultures to express themselves without abandoning the values that have held the dominant culture together and made it attractive to the outside world? The EU has officially adopted Ode to Joy as its anthem. I guess most Europeans have at least heard Beethoven's famous tune. The problem is nobody seems to be able to agree on what the lyrics should be. After all, what does Europe stand for these days?